Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Value of Using Security Policy Orchestration and Automation for Improving Change Management and SecOps. My name is Raleigh Gould and I'll be your moderator for today's event. Our featured speaker is David Monahan, Managing Research Director at Enterprise Management Associates. David's in-depth security experience, which spans over 20 years, has included organizing and managing physical and information security programs. He has contributed content to a wide variety of industry forums and periodicals, including State Tech, CIO, CSO, and Computer World magazine. And before I hand things over to David, I wanted today's audience to know that you can log questions anytime using the Q&A functionality. David will be dedicating the last 10 or 15 minutes to answering your questions. Also, today's event is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email from EMA that will include the on-demand playback, as well as some additional resources. So I hope you will check that out. And now I'd like to go ahead and turn things over to our featured speaker, David Monahan. David?
Thanks, Raleigh. I appreciate your time. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Thank you for joining us, taking a few minutes out of your busy schedule to learn more about security policy orchestration and automation. So we had a very interesting time in the research project, but the first thing I'd like to do is to thank our sponsor, Firewall. They were very helpful in trying to understand more about the subject so we could go out and do the research. And when we looked at the research specifically, one of the things I wanted to bring up in the early part of this is kind of a transition in the nomenclature. So I previously have used the nomenclature Network Security Policy Management, NSPM, and I'm really transitioning more into security policy orchestration and automation. And the reason for that particular change is a change in the focus and in the use cases that we're seeing for the technology. So in the most basic sense, the vendors in this space would use the technology to coordinate policies across multiple firewalls, whether that's the same firewall vendor or different firewall vendors. And that was a very useful technology, really got them off the ground. But in terms of the use cases, and we'll discuss some of these later in the webinar, what we're seeing now is the ability to orchestrate across the firewalls and to automate many aspects of determining firewall policy flaws and gaps and issues with security around the configurations in these firewalls, and using a lot of the what-if tools and other aspects. That's becoming a significant value add to the folks that are buying these technologies. And so really it seems more like the nomenclature ought to change to more aptly represent how they're being used. So within the research itself, just a quick few demographic slides let you know what we did. You can see here the breakout. We had executive IT management, which would be senior directors and above. You have IT management, which are management up through the senior managers. We had staff. We also looked at what we could get in terms of focusing specifically on security people, whether that was cybersecurity, fraud, risk, compliance, etc. And then we did have a small slice of the other. So we had a good representation across the board between management and individual contributors, and between security and non-security personnel. Additionally, one of the things that we wanted to look at is who is using the technology. And so doing a little preliminary research, we decided to focus on companies that were 1,000 people or greater. If you have a single firewall, there's not a lot of need for a technology like this, right? You're not going to get the additional value add out of it, if you have one or two firewalls. So really we wanted to look at companies that were larger, so they had more people, more locations, and more firewalls. So this would be the breakout by the organizational sizes. And then on the next slide here, we looked at how many firewalls do you have that you're managing within your organization. And there was a pretty good spread there. So at 1,000 and above, 25% of the organizations had between 5 and 15 firewalls. You can see the breakout, 16 to 25, 26, 50, so forth. And there were a good chunk of those organizations that had 100 or more firewalls that they were dealing with. That to me was amazing. Because that's not necessarily all the 20,000 and above companies, though that is the vast majority of them. So depending upon the size of the company and the number of employees you have, we'll break out into the number of locations you're going to have if you're a global company, and then ultimately the number of firewalls you're going to use. And with most cases, that's organizations that have a firewall each one of the remote locations, as opposed to, of course, backhauling all of the information to a central headquarters and then being able to pump it out from there. You obviously don't need as many firewalls if you're going to backhaul all the traffic. And we've found over time that the original thought behind this was to maintain a central firewall that was big and beefy and everybody came through it, so you could have less technology spread out through the environment. You could have a centralized IT staff that would manage it. And then over time that's migrated to having more decentralized firewalls. And part of that has been the introduction of different types of firewalls, whether that's the excuse me, the Soho type 5 to 10 person office firewalls that are much cheaper. You don't have to buy a $30,000 firewall to stick in a remote location. You can buy something that's much more reasonable. And in doing that, you're saving on the backhauling costs. You're reducing latency, and there's other factors. And now with these technologies in this area, you can remotely manage those firewalls and keep a comprehensive view of what's going on amongst all of your policies. This particular question asks how many different types of firewalls. So it's not, do you have 5 firewalls? It's how many different. Do you have 5 different firewall vendors? Do you have one different firewall? You have one single firewall vendor, etc. And so there was a good heterogeneity here amongst the firewalls that are out there. And there's pros and cons for that particular approach. And just as a quick overview there, if you have one technology that's a single vendor, a single throat to choke, if you will, if something goes wrong, you usually spend less on training because you're talking to a single vendor. However, the advantages of having multiple vendors are if you do come across a flaw in a particular vendor or you're having an issue with that firewall, you have the other firewall can hopefully protect if you're using a multi-layered design to be able to protect your environment. And it may be that certain vendors got better performance or better features on smaller versus larger firewalls. So there are definite advantages of having a multi-firewall design as well. The true advantage, or one of the true advantages of looking at security policy automation is the ability to standardize firewall policies across multiple vendors and being able to deploy those policies and manage them, right? So you don't have to worry about using multiple GUIs to deploy one on a particular vendor and then a different GUI on another vendor. You can use a single management capability to deploy them across multiple vendors and still standardize those. So that's also a big advantage of security policy orchestration and automation in being able to help manage those firewalls when you have a heterogeneous environment. Key respondent industries. So a lot of the respondents did come from the high technology area. There's a lot of investment in technology when you're in high technology. Below that, you can see we also had representation from finance and banking, manufacturing, retail, down through professional services, healthcare, managed services, and so forth. So we've got a good representation across multiple areas of industry. And interestingly enough, there were a number of commonalities amongst all, which is great for research, right? Oh, there's common use cases, but there were also some one-offs that were interesting that we were able to pull out amongst the different industries. So aside from the commonalities, and we'll talk about some of these as well as we move on, there were some interesting, unique use cases that came out as well. Firewall management and outsourcing. So one of the things that we've seen, and you've probably heard this in other webinars as well, is we have a security shortage, right? We don't have enough people to do everything. That's been pretty common for the last few years, and it's probably not going to go away. And so basically your choices are, how do I automate more, right? Or do I outsource this to a partner of some kind to help do that? So one of the other questions we ask is, well, if you started this research, are you outsourcing or not? And we focused on the folks that were not outsourcing, right, because that gives us more information about how we're actually doing it internally. So this particular question was a pre-screening question. Say, well, what are you doing? So how much of this are you outsourcing? So 30% said we have 25% or less of our firewall outsourced. There we go. I can do this, and you can go down from there. So there's still a big push to try and engage managed service providers for areas that we don't want to focus on or we don't have the key or the ability to do that. But there's also a large desire for many companies to maintain that in-house, which means you're going to have to figure out how to automate and how to scale your business, because you can't hire, we can't feed the world in a flower pot. We can't hire enough people to do everything that we want to do because either we don't have the budgets or we can't find the staff. So there's definitely a niche for this particular technology set, and that is where you need to be able to scale, and you have to be able to automate these actions because you can't find the staff or you don't have the budget to maintain the staff. All right, so here's an interesting situation that we ran into. We asked, well, are you able to establish firewall policy baselines or standards? If you have multiple firewalls out there, is this just the Wild West and you're creating firewall policies as you go? And yeah, we'll do them on a one-off basis, or we're looking at them in a microcosm individually, or are you actually able to look at your environment across the way and determine some sort of baselines or standards? So only 29% said we've been able to establish strong, consistent baselines across our firewalls, and with any fewer or any deviations. 71% are more in the, yeah, we're doing something, maybe we're not doing anything, we're just kind of all over the place. And so I think this sets a good foundation for a picture of where we are out in the universe. And you can probably answer this question for your own organization if you're involved in IT and security. And unfortunately what happens that I've seen in my past is we get into firefighting mode. So a change comes through. Hopefully it goes through some sort of process to be approved first. If that's the case, great. If not, well, we need to work on that too. But once it gets through the process, people are looking at a particular firewall for a particular instance, and then we start creating policies. And usually what happens over time is we get this, what I call policy sprawl, where new rules are added to make stuff work. No one really goes back and thoroughly analyzes the rules. Even in compliance areas where you have to go through and look at those, I don't think the same level of scrutiny is applied to them that could be in many cases, because going through them by hand or using some of the tools that are basically involved is difficult. It takes time, and so you'll do the minimum you can to make sure that you're compliant and that the firewall is as secure as possible, and I put that in air quotes because I think that it's all over the place. But the issue is being able to make a consistent plan across all those firewalls so you know what they're supposed to be doing, what they are doing, and that they're all working in unison to maintain the same level of security. You don't have one firewall out here in a remote office that's not well maintained. It could be the back office entrance, if you will, into the environment. And we've seen that via numerous types of hacking incidents in the past 4 or 5 years especially, where we get somebody coming through a third-party vendor, we get somebody coming through a remote office firewall or something, right? So the main gate, strong as it can be, no one's getting through the sucker, but then there's some other gate out there that's not quite where it needs to be, and the hackers are looking for the easiest way in, right? They're not into bludgeoning themselves against a brick wall. They want to find a window that's open on the side of the house. Okay, firewall policy analysis techniques. We said, okay, you've got these firewalls out there, you're having trouble with the baselines, what are some of the other issues? And this particular question says, well, how are you evaluating your firewalls? And so 50% said we're doing it by hand, right? Or we're using professional services. So professional services can get expensive, especially if you've got to do this every year or multiple, every quarter for compliance reasons or so forth. That can get expensive. Manual policy inspection, again, my view on that is it's often done kind of ad hoc. It's done very quickly, and we quote unquote get the job done, but it's not, in many cases it's not where it needs to be, especially if you have a very complex, very long policy. So 40% said we're using some sort of third-party tool. We bought something out there that helps us to evaluate our policies, and I think that's good, right? That's a very good idea. That's part of what SPOA does. It helps you to analyze that. And then there's 10% that said we've created something in-house that we're able to use. So I think that the top category are the ones that are in the worst shape. The bottom category, they're trying to do something. They're trying to do some kind of automation. They're building it in-house, but they probably aren't getting the same level of benefit they could by looking at a vendor who's able to deliver a specialized solution to help you do that, which is that middle category of a third-party tool of some kind. There we go. Okay. So how difficult is it, with all these manual efforts and the issues that you have, how difficult it is to maintain a standardized, synchronized policy? 69%, man, we're just not getting there, right? We understand that we have a lack, and I think that's good. It's not good that we have a lack, but it's good that organizations understand that it's very difficult and there's a problem, because that's often the motivator or the catalyst to go and do something about it, right? So I think from that perspective, it's a good thing if we recognize our foibles or our faults or our weaknesses, because that gives us the ability to do that. 24% said it's minimally difficult, and 7% said no, we got it covered. So I think that the two other groups, I don't want to focus on those, but I want to focus on the groups that say we realize how difficult it is, because that's very closely in alignment with the folks that said we don't have standards, right? And that's because it's virtually impossible to take care of that. So it was interesting that those two numbers lined up very, very closely. Business impacts from inability to maintain policy standardization. Now, this was interesting. 90% said they've had significant to very significant inability or impacts from their inability to maintain that. So this is even larger than the group that said we don't have the tools or that we're not maintaining a standard. But when they have a problem, 90% said, this is a significant issue. It's causing us a lot of headaches, heartburn, whatever analogy you want to use there. And again, I think this is a motivator. If this many percentage, if this high percentage of the organizations are having significant or very significant impacts from a lack of policy standardization, to me that should also be a catalyst or a key to them that if we have a tool that we've created in-house, for example, it's not doing the job. If we're doing it by hand, it's not doing the job either. If we're using some sort of SPOA tool, then that's also an issue, because that probably means you're either not using it correctly, you don't have it configured correctly, or you may have bought the wrong tool for the job. Because in this kind of an area, the tools are not all created equal. Vendors focus on different aspects of the stack, support different vendors. There's some common vendors they all support, but they also may focus on or have additional capabilities of what if. What about vulnerabilities? What about patch management? What about application flows? There's all kinds of different ways that they can focus their energies on trying to support that, and that's part of what you need to understand from a selection criteria perspective when you develop your indicators or your spreadsheet or whatever document it is that has all of your requirements on it. You should be going through, and these are the things that we need to focus on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These are the types of vendors we need to support. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and rank these out so that as you go to talk to these vendors, you're able to have an intelligent conversation around those requirements and determine which one of these 8 vendors do I want to focus on, maybe the top 3 for my proof of concept. So you're not wasting your time, you're not wasting their time, right? A vendor doesn't want to come in and 2 weeks into the evaluation go, oh, you stink, you're not covering my requirements. Well, what are your requirements, right? So most of them will ask you what those are ahead of time so that they understand what their criteria for success are, and so you should be very, very familiar with those as you work through that requirements process. All right, so case study, application migration and disaster recovery. We asked, hey, have you had a project to migrate one of your applications to the cloud or between clouds in the last year? 76% said, yeah, we've had that happen, and that's pretty in line with the other numbers we're seeing in terms of digital transformation, cloud adoptions, and so forth. So 76% said, yeah, we've got this thing going, we're feeling good. Interestingly enough, we said, okay, well, what's your confidence level that this thing would work first shot, right? You turn your head a little bit and you flip the switch and the electricity starts to hum and whir, and 71% said we're confident that this was going to work. 22%, yeah, we're not really sure, and 7%, yeah, I really don't think this is going to work. Please don't put me in the room when we flip the switch. So if you combine this with our next answer, it gets really interesting, right? Well, did it fail or not? Well, hold on a second. So you're telling me 71% said we are confident that this will work on activation, and the folks that have actually done it, it was almost a 50-50 shot that they'd had some kind of failure. So this is where we come back to the ability to understand what your security policies are, because if you have a firewall policy that's going to end up breaking that application when you migrate it from one data center to another, whether it's private cloud or from your internal data center to a public cloud of some kind, that's going to be a significant issue, right? This could be a severe career-limiting move if your application doesn't migrate properly and or your disaster recovery fails when you need it because you didn't test it. So this is definitely an area where security policy automation orchestration automation shines. It really helps you understand what's going to happen when I migrate this application. What rules do I need to change? What's going to break, or how do I keep it from breaking? So I think this was a primary use case that we came across that a lot of people were fumbling around, right? We're doing it by hand, we're breaking stuff, and we're having issues. We really don't want that to take place, right? So what can we do? All right, back to our program. So interesting enough, so we look at the top 5 use cases from prospects. So these are folks that have not bought it, but they're interested, right? I'm planning on buying this in the next year. Here's why I want to buy it. First one, firewall policy analysis, 38%. Okay, I can understand that. Firewall policy optimization, still well in line. Cross-firewall policy standardization. You can read all the things we got here, but it was very interesting to go through these. I think these are very well in line with the use cases that are promoted by the technology vendors in this space, right? We can do these things This is why you want our technology. So that's great, right? Apparently the messaging is getting out there. People are interested, and they're seeing this from a use case perspective. Yep, I'm on board. This is what I want to do. Interestingly enough, we have another situation where, what about if you've already bought it, right? So I've bought it. I thought I was going to do these things, and I think that they have done these things, but the perspective changed just a little bit, because once they had it installed, they realized they could get benefit out of it from a risk management perspective. Well, how is that? Well, hey, if we're tightening up our firewall policies and we're finding misconfigured rules or holes in the policy between two different firewalls where they don't align properly, whatever the case is, right? We are reducing risk within our business. We're tightening down. We're reducing the attack surface that can be leveraged against us. So from that perspective, that was the biggest response from the folks that had it. So I thought that was, look at that again, right? So risk management was down here at number 4. On the prospects, but once they had it, they realized the benefits of it, and it really popped up. Now, firewall policy optimization and policy analysis, which were number 2 and number 1 respectively in the last slide, they reversed a little bit. But I thought it was very interesting to see how the perspective changed from a pre-buy and a post-buy perspective when we started asking about this. Okay. So business application workflows, that was a big one as well. You can set down there at number 4. And though there are, apparently I can't count, right? There are more than 5 here. A couple of them are tied, so I don't count those because I consider them a tie. But ultimately I'll have to work on my counting ability. I'm glad I use spreadsheets for most of this stuff. But I thought it was very interesting that enhanced business continuity disaster response are still there, still high on the list. And then as we start to move out, coordinating policies across a geographically diverse location. So all of these are significant benefits that customers got out. So I think this chart has a lot of value just because of that. And I like to juxtaposition those two particular charts. What did I buy it for, and then what did I use it for? Mostly after I got it. And so there's a great amount of overlay, but there are some additional interesting aspects here as well. All right, top 5 benefits of using the solution. In this particular case, I have the NSPM, Network Security Policy Management, the older term for firewall change management. So we got this solution, right? We knew we had a problem with maintaining standardization in our firewalls. We had a problem with our change management process. So when we started drilling down into issues around the change management process, how did it help you to improve that change management process? First, improve security by reducing incorrect changes. So you can do the what-if scenario, right? If I put this in there, is it going to do what I think it's going to do? And one of the things you've probably all seen from an IT perspective when firewall rules are introduced, oftentimes they're very broad, right? We don't know exactly what ports we need for this particular new application, so we're going to have to put this in place. Again, turn our head a little bit and flip the switch and see if it works, and hopefully we can get everything done and up to speed in the change control window that we have established. I've seen that happen many, many times. And usually what happens in that case is it starts broad. It may get a little less broad, but then it stops, and we don't necessarily reduce that policy to its most efficient and most precise or concise configuration. Or the other happens where it's too narrow, stuff doesn't work, we start opening up ports. Is it going to work yet? Look at the log. Okay, yeah, we got to do this. And so we expand that policy out, and then somewhere in there we get frustrated and say, okay, just open up ports 1024 and greater, man. Just go. Oh, it works now. Okay, super. We're done. Let's, all high fives and belly bumps, and we're all good. So those are issues that I commonly saw in the past with incorrect changes. Of course, the other is if someone typos something that's not tested during the window, someone goes back and it's still not working, and you have to fix that. But the what-if scenario capability is fantastic in these solutions. Additionally, standardizing the security policy implementation. Right now, I know that if I make a change to one policy that's supposed to be across the entire organization, I can go back and make sure that it's in all the other firewall policies as well. Simplifying the change management process, because we can test these changes in a what-if scenario prior to actually implementing them in real life. So all of these things can help us to avoid that situation where we get down to the wire, we're in the change window, stuff's not working, and then we have to scramble to make it work. Top 5 work reductions created by utilizing the SPOA. Okay, so security incident frequency, right? If we're making better policy decisions and better policy implementations, then we should have fewer security incidents because the policies are more accurate. Not to say everything is perfect, because people make mistakes in terms of, I may create a policy, validate that it's correct, and still not have exactly what what I need in the long run. But they do help us, right? We're able to do again what ifs. We're able to actually put these things in, standardize them, make sure they're all operating effectively, and move along. So our security incident frequency went down. That was the biggest one. The next thing was investigation time, and I think those two are, from a security perspective, the thing that we see most from a security that causes the hair on fire. We're in reactive mode. We're not getting the things done we need to because we have more security alerts and security incidents that we have to deal with, and we're spending a lot of time investigating them. So if we can stop that at the beginning of the process so they're not getting in the first place, then we can save a significant amount of time. Notice the third one was pre-implementation change testing, right? So we've been able to reduce the work that's involved there because we don't have to do it by hand. We have a tool that's specifically designed to help us with that. And I thought, interestingly enough as well, audit costs. Well, why is that? Well, because if I have a tool that I can document what all my policies are and show that I have validated them, well, that should help me a lot from an audit perspective, because I know when I was doing audit stuff in the payments industry, I had to go back through all the policies, review them, identify what rules were implemented, why they were implemented, and go through that entire detailed process. And having the ability to have a tool in place that helps me to document that as I go, so I don't have to go back and do it again, or just review it as opposed to going through it line by line and doing all the detail work. That's a huge cost saver. Top 5 operational improvements after installation, right? So improve productivity, efficiency of IT security management, absolutely. Right? I can validate changes before they get implemented. I can spend less time during the change, and I don't have to worry about it after the change. Greater security effectiveness of the business, absolutely. I've got better policies. I've got more effective policies, and so I've reduced risk like we talked about in the previous slide, and that means that overall security is more effective. And you can present that to the business, right? If you've been able to shorten the change control time and you've been able to get more accurate changes, that's something you should be able to promote back to the business as security effectiveness. Improve productivity and efficiency, improve strategic decision making, and lastly, improve productivity and efficiency of change management. So all of these are going to be beneficial to the organization in helping to avoid additional human costs, right, from time, expended additional employee, and so forth. So I think these are all great operational improvements. Ultimately, I think the goal here in the discussion is to help everyone to understand the benefits of these types of tools. There are definite problems that they solve, but I think it comes back to making sure that you understand your requirements and why you're doing it. Why are you investigating a policy automation tool? Why do you want to do this, right? So I can't help but re-stress. Make sure that you understand what your business requirements are, document them, prioritize them, and then that will make your identification of a vendor and ultimately this trek to get through and understand what tool you need much easier on you. We appreciate again Firemon's support of the particular project, and if you want to visit them, you can visit them at www.firemon.com. So Raleigh, I'll hand it back over to you for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, David. If you have any questions, you can log them now using the Q&A functionality. David, I'm going to go ahead and jump right into the questions. The first one is, where do you think this market is in terms of maturity? Emerging, growth, mature, or declining? What are you seeing?
Well, I think that at this point, they're past emerging. If you think about this as a bell curve, for example, everybody in your heads, they got a bell curve, and you divide it into 4 quadrants. You have the early emerging. You have very few vendors. Of course, they're growing very quickly because you can double when you have 0 customers and go to 1. You've infinitely increased, and then from 1 to 2, you've doubled, and so forth. So as you move along that curve, you get to what we call the chasm, and the chasm is an area where you see a lot of vendors either merging or you see vendors falling out because they can't keep up with the pace, right? They can't gain enough market share and so forth. I think we're somewhere in the latter part of the chasm into growth area. We've seen a number of vendors that have been in the space for a while. We've seen a few that have come in, and a few other companies that have expanded into this particular space. So I think we're still in a slightly at the end of the fallout period, but I think we're right there at that chasm to the growth area where you're going to see a hockey stick incline of adoption. And I think a couple of drivers for that are again the lack of staff. Right? I think budgets have been pretty good over the last few years. I think the average IT spend increase has been about 9 to 11%. Security has been higher than that, either as its own budget or as a proportion of the IT budget. And so the money is there to look at tools, and these tools have done a lot in the last couple years, especially, to evolve their technologies and their capabilities. So I think we're just at the edge, the trailing edge of the chasm at that growth phase, and I think we're going to see some significant growth in this area.
Thank you for that insight, David. We also received a question regarding, is NSPM the same as SPOA?
So yeah, the same market space, and just to clarify, so NSPM is Network Security Policy Management. SPOA is Security Policy Orchestration and Automation, and the reason for that nomenclature migration was because of the use cases and the functionality that these tools have been evolving. So you're always hesitant to change a nomenclature, but I think in this particular case, the orchestration automation features and capabilities are really pushing out there and really gaining ground, so that's why I changed that.
Great, thanks for clarifying. The next question is, what is the crucial measurement or sweet spot for companies to know if evaluating these types of solutions is right for them?
Well, I think that I went over some of that at the middle and the end in terms of generating requirements. I don't know that I can answer that for each individual company, but first of all, is what types of firewalls do you have? What vendors do you have? Ensure that the vendors you're looking at have those. Are you looking at doing more migrations to cloud? That could be a very big benefit to having one of these installed. Are you short on security staff? Do you have issues with maintaining your standardized policies? Right? Are you in that group that said, yeah, we can't do it, or we're doing it manually? And we feel like we're failing. Right? If you've had a security incident where the firewall policy has not, was at fault, right? Somebody either engineered it wrong, it was coordinated wrong, whatever the case is, right? Or we just didn't understand. That's definitely another area where it would be a motivation to look at this type of a technology to figure out, why did this fail? Was it because I didn't have the analytics capabilities to understand what I was doing? Right? And if that's the case, then that should be a driver to look at a tool like this. If it was just someone typoed a firewall rule, that's still something that these particular tools can help you with. But if it's you just did this once and you've never had a problem since then, maybe not the investment that you want to prioritize right now. If it's something that happens often, now we're back to the other side of that needle, where okay, if we're making common mistakes or consistent mistakes, then we need to have some means of backing up those people to make sure that we're doing the right thing, right? And it could also be a training issue on the side of the employees as well. But having a safety gate, if you will, or a safety net on the backside to help you evaluate policies before you implement them is also another one. If you have multiple locations and multiple types of firewalls, right, the ability to look at those firewalls, evaluate them in a singular interface, and to push policies out that are standardized, it's another good time saver as well. You don't have to make 5 change windows and go, okay, or extend the change window because I got to go into this GUI and do it here, and then I got to go over here and log in and do it here, and then I got to go over, I can go one place, make the change, push it out, validate that it's active, and I'm done. So you're saving time there from your change window perspective. So I hope that helps for that particular question. If there's any other details someone wants, let me know.
Great. Thank you, David. Those are all the questions we received, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I wanted to thank our audience again for joining us. As I mentioned, you will be receiving a follow-up email with some resources from today's event, so I do hope that you will check that out, and I hope that we see you at a future event. Thanks again for taking time out of your schedule to join us.
Thank you.